And as the sign indicated a few minutes ago, today finds me in western Rhode Island. This is Kent County, Rhode Island. It's about halfway up the western border of Rhode Island, between the Massachusetts border to our north and the Atlantic Ocean to our south, and we're just a few miles east of the Connecticut border. And this whole western third of Rhode Island is devoid of large towns, but plentiful in places to explore. And the Nature Conservancy and several other governmental organizations have preserved several thousand acres around what's called Tillinghast Pond. And got a cool gray, getting colder day as the day goes on. I had to bring some extra layers for later on. We've got an Arctic cold front coming through with lows near zero tonight, but today's about 35 right now and not that cold with a little bit of breeze. But I am prepared for temperatures to drop all day. I've got about 7 hours to explore this area. There's 13 miles of marked trails here, and from what I can see, they are marked quite well. They're using a double blaze, not to indicate a turn in the trail, but just to indicate the trail in general. So if there's any doubt, double blaze on this trail at least does not mean a turn, but just the marking itself. We're starting at the west end of this preserve, but there's many other places to access it. I parked on what's called Hazard Road to the west side of this preserve. It's all shown in green here. And we're going to be on what's called the Shepherd Trail for about 7/10 of a mile. There's a loop that runs off of that called the Coney Brook loop, which is 2 miles long, and there's supposed to be some cascades on the north end of that loop. Several homesteads along the loops in this park, including the Parker Homestead and the Ellis Homestead. My goal today would be to approach this area from the west, head towards the Coney Cascades, go around Tillinghast Pond up to what's called the Boulder Garden, which is almost 600 feet above sea level, and then explore the east end of this preserve as time allows. I like to take my time to make videos, so 7 hours can often mean only 8 or 9 miles of hiking because of the amount of videoing I like to do on these hikes. But if time allows, I'll make it over to the Wilcox Homestead, maybe Cathedral Pines, Rattlesnake Ledge. I think the rattlesnakes are extirpated from this area, like it or not. No modern reports of rattlesnakes in Rhode Island, but the ledge would have been a good place for them to hang out when they were around. And they're not going to be out today, even if they were still living in this area. So many, many loops in this park. We'll see how much time allows. We're not going to try to do all of them, but we'll do as much as time allows and see what there is to see in early January here. And I've mentioned in some of the other hikes I've done in this area that the gypsy moth caterpillar really did cause a lot of damage to the oak forests in eastern Connecticut, western Rhode Island, and all through the Appalachian Mountains, but especially around here. And the Nature Conservancy is doing some removal of the dead oak trees on some of these trails to encourage, reproduction of newer species. In this case, I think these pine trees are going to take over without any extra help. There's plenty of sunlight coming through and plenty of larger white pines around here to seed in to these open areas that used to be forested. Pretty good chance we'll see some pitch pine on this hike too. Haven't seen any yet though. That's another native pine tree to this area. And here's actually a fairly primitive plant. It's pretty common in all the areas I've hiked, called princess pine. It gets about 3 or 4 inches high. Beautiful in the wintertime when everything else is brown and gray. And right next to it, we've got a ground cover. It's called ground cedar, and it only gets a few inches high. And instead of growing up, it grows outward by sending runners in all directions. Usually if you start seeing ground cedar, it usually means the soil is very poor and lacking in nutrients. Often it grows in areas that were abandoned farmland. Speaking of cedars, I just added another cedar to my Barking Up the Right Tree channel. And there's supposed to be some of it growing just down the trail here a few hundred yards. We'll see if we can find it. But that cedar is called Atlantic white cedar. And unlike this ground cedar, it does get to full height. And as we continue along the approach to the west side of this preserve on the Shepherd Trail, we do come to Atlantic white cedar swamp. This one's only maybe 10 or 20 acres in size. Some of the ones I recorded a few weeks ago were much larger than that. About 15-20 miles south of here at the Long and L Pond Preserves and along the Patchogue Trail in Connecticut. But this Atlantic white cedar can reach for the sky. It doesn't get quite as high as the white pine in the center of your screen. But it can get to 60 or 80 feet and a couple feet in diameter if they have a chance to live that long. And they do live that long. Unless something were to disturb this cedar stand, they can live for hundreds of years and grow nice and straight. They were a very popular tree for using for fence posts and wooden shingles and wooden siding back before other materials were easily available. And they often grow in these almost pure stands in these lowlands along the Atlantic coast. It's called Atlantic white cedar because it only grows within a few counties of the Atlantic coast from southern Maine all the way down to the Gulf Coast. So obviously the cold or the heat isn't the reason for its distribution, but proximity to the ocean. And I don't know if there's an explanation for that geographic distribution, but that's where it's found. And we'll see if we can find more of it on this hike. And they even said there's some native rhododendron in this park near the cedar trees. I'm not seeing it right now, but we'll keep our eyes open for that. And it's ironic that I mentioned that these cedar trees can live a long time if nothing disturbs them. And this is a new hike to me, so I had no idea that just around the corner there was a cedar swamp that had been, the water level had been raised, and these trees can grow in damp soil and on these hummocks, but they can't grow in standing water that stays there year-round. So what I've got in front of me here is an Atlantic white cedar. There was about a foot in diameter, and several more in the background here that are even larger than that. They got their feet just a little too wet, and something caused the level of this is called Coney Brook, C-O-N-E-Y Brook, flowing through here. Something caused the water level to get high enough to drown out these cedar trees and several of the other varieties of trees growing in this wetland. And my first guess, and probably my second guess, would be beaver activity. And the other possibility is human alteration of the channel of this brook that may have caused the water level to come up. I do see off in the background there a sand and gravel pit that's off the Nature Conservancy property here. So I'm guessing beavers. I'd have to go down there and look for sure, and I'm not going to, but that would be the first and second guess in this case for what would cause this cedar swamp to die back. And we've made our way onto the Coney Brook loop, and I'm doing that loop in a clockwise fashion from the Shepherd Trail. And the spur trail, which is the Shepherd Trail that I started on, had a double blaze. Once I got on this Coney Brook loop, we're back to a single blaze with an orange color. So we'll see if that trend continues with the loop trails and the spur trails in this park. But the map is easy to read and the trails are easy to follow and well maintained. I'm always looking for things to brighten up gray and brown that we get in the wintertime in the eastern United States, especially the northeastern and Great Lakes and Ohio Valley. I always like the colder weather because you get more blue sky, and on these days that are kind of in between, it gets a little dreary. So let's brighten it up. Got a little bit of leftover snow. And we've got these beautiful little red berries. Several varieties of ground cover herbs here that are evergreen that have red berries. Here's our partridge berry with a small berry about the size of a pea and a leaf that's not much bigger than that. And right up the trail here, we've got the more common evergreen berry in this park, at least, is our tea berry or wintergreen. And it has a similar sized berry, about the size of a pea, but the leaves are much larger and they're also evergreen. I have noticed some of these what look like green leaves actually turn red during the midwinter, not only on this wintergreen, but also on some of the sheep laurel here. Sheep laurel is common to our north. It's pretty common in this area as well, often found with the evergreen forests. It can get much larger than this guy right here. This guy's about a foot high. It can get to be waist high. The leaves kind of look long and narrow, about 1.5 inches long. And they do retain their leaves all winter, and this grows in very cold climates where having leaves all winter isn't really something that's advantageous to most plants. But it does grow much further north than here, even into southern Canada. Not too common to our south, only in special habitats. So let's continue on this Coney Brook loop. There's a lot of pine along here and some pretty large pines in places. And I can say from all the hiking I've done in southern and southeast New England here and eastern Connecticut, almost every stream, especially these smaller ones, have been put to use in pre-industrial days to turn the mechanisms of water-powered machinery, small mills, sawmills, grist mills, and this Coney Brook is no exception. And what's showing up as cascades on the map is where they have diverted the water from the main valley here to my left through a diversion ditch, and it's kind of tumbling down through this pretty much a gravelly sandy deposit in this area. There's no bedrock right here on this trail. This is all a pretty vast sand plain in this valley of Coney Brook. So the stream hasn't found a ledge, but it has found a lot of large boulders. And that's what they used to create this little mill dam down here, to store water to power whatever machinery they were trying to use to do the work that needed to be done. I don't know the history of this particular spot here. It isn't described in any of the park literature, but you do see quite a few small cobbles here. That were piled up to create this dam. So it's not uncommon at all to find the ruins of old mills from the 16, 17, early 1800s in this area. And I've always been amazed at what these highly sophisticated rodents, the beaver, can do. I mean, he's cut right through. I believe this is a red oak tree here. It's got the red heartwood. So that's not easy chewing there, but he's felled this red oak tree right into his meadow here. There's a little beaver pond just off the trail here, a little beaver dam just off the trail. They created a temporary pond here. And there's a beaver lodge in the middle of the pond that was out of view of this camera. As you can see from that last video, they're active in this area, and that would probably explain the what it would cause the death of those Atlantic white cedar trees a little while ago, back a couple miles ago. So yes, and this is a fresh cut here. I can still smell the you know, this northern red oak has a distinct smell when you cut it. And I can still smell it. So this is a fresh cut here, and he's done some chewing on the limbs that landed in the pond. It's hard to see from here, but he's been working on that bark. And they can get nutrition from the inner bark of these trees in the wintertime when other plants aren't available for their use. So beavers do not hibernate, and they tend to work at night. And they can work real fast. I've camped in places where they've cut through a tree about this size in just 2 nights, and it was concerning because he was cutting it right towards where the tent was. And a couple days later I came back after leaving that campsite, and the tree had fallen just where the tent was. So never underestimate the ability of beavers to fell trees and fell them in a hurry. And about 2 hours and 2.5 miles into this 7-hour hike today, we've traded the orange blaze of the Coney Brook loop for the white blaze of the Tillinghast Pond loop. And you can see the pond in the background here. I just crossed the outlet to that pond, which goes underneath a road. But it does appear that this is a natural pond. It's big enough to be called a lake, but it's quite shallow, so nobody really comes around and surveys these lakes and ponds and decides which is a lake and which is a pond. But in general, the shallow bodies of water are called ponds in New England, and the deeper ones are called lakes. And I've been to ponds that are 6-8 miles across but very shallow, and lakes that are much smaller but deeper. So this appears to be a natural body of water. I don't see any man-made structures, either from colonial days with hand-stacked stones or concrete dams at the outlet of this pond. It appears to be natural. And that's not surprising. This is quite a bit of sand and gravel in this area here. So often the sandy, gravelly areas in New England were formed during the melting of the glaciers, and chunks of ice got left behind as the glaciers melted, and the sand and gravel went around those blocks of ice. And when the ice finally melted, there was a depression in the sand and gravel deposits. They're called kettle holes. Sometimes they're small, sometimes they're quite large. And beautiful little pond here, maybe a half-mile across. Boy, that ice is nice and smooth looking. I don't think it's quite thick enough to skate on with confidence, but it'd be a beautiful place to ice skate when the ice is thicker. And with the colder weather coming this week, I would say that that would be a possibility. I'm always a little hesitant to skate on places that I don't know, because you don't know where the springs come up. And if there's underground springs in a pond, doesn't matter how cold it is, it can create thin ice. So I'm not going to skate here, but it sure looks like a nice place to skate if you knew the area well enough to do so with confidence. And as you come around the north side of Tillinghast Pond here, we're doing the Tillinghast Pond loop in a clockwise direction. There are some hayfields near the trail with no rocks sticking up, so that's good soil for this part of the world. Probably pretty sandy and gravelly, but to not have boulders sticking up is a blessing in southern New England. And they've created this nice overlook at the north end of the pond here. This is supposed to be really good for wildlife viewing. I see some wood duck boxes, and I'm sure at a warmer time of year there'd be plenty of birds to observe in this area. We're going to continue along here, and eventually we're going to get into an area that's supposed to have a lot of boulders and ledges, so we'll be out of the valley here that collected all this sand and gravel, and up to some bedrock hills, and see how much more we can explore. We've got plenty of time left, and several more loops to try here. And as expected, the land became much more bouldery around the northeast corner of this Tillinghast Pond. We even have some beaver dams on this little stream going into Tillinghast Pond. They've created a little dam down here and drowned out some of these trees. And we looked at a northern red oak. I believe it was northern red oak or scarlet or black oak with red heartwood a few minutes ago. Well, this guy here has been chewing through something with a lighter heartwood. I believe this is a white ash. It could be a green ash or a black ash, but not much for me to work with right here except for the bark. And several more right there. Look like that guy had a double trunk and he felled both of them. Unfortunately, they both got hung up and create a little dam in the background here. We'll try to zoom in on that. Between here and the pond itself, there's a dam about 3 feet high. So, you know, the scenery back here is not real striking or spectacular at this point, but very gentle and subtle, but still a lot to look at in this preserve. And these preserves are here for a lot of reasons, not just for scenic value. And let's continue on. We're going to start heading up toward what shows up on the map as a boulder field, and we'll see what's back there.